Welcome to Word in Your Ear. This is just one of the things we do. If you want to help us keep doing them, go to patreon.com/wordinyourear. You won't regret it.
Okay, we are recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Word in Your Ear, and very pleased to have with us today a gentleman who is best known as the sonic architect of what I think it's fair to call the seminal first two albums from The Strokes, Mr. Gordon Raphael. Hello, Gordon. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. And where are you beaming in from today?
I'm beaming in from West Yorkshire, UK, up here in Hebden Bridge.
Hebden Bridge, wow. Swinging West Yorkshire. So I guess the climate's not too different to where you grew up, which was the Seattle areas. Is that right?
I think it's very similar. It tends to rain.
Seattle's the rainiest city in the US, isn't it?
It seems like when I grew up, it rained almost every other day or something all year round. And I think it's less rainy now, because of the global shift. It still probably rains a lot, but nothing like it did when I was a kid.
Well, I spent quite a lot of time there this year, actually, funnily enough. And I think it's only actually rained once. And it was proper rain. But we got pretty lucky, I think. But so tell me what it was like growing up in Seattle around the music scene there, because you were right in the middle of the grunge thing, weren't you?
Right. Well, I started earlier. I was working in music for at least like a decade before the grunge thing happened. Yeah. And I describe in my book that there was a lot of very incredible bands, like really innovative, very poetic, and everybody dressed amazing in like these, in the 80s, early 80s, like in these incredible vintage suits and punk rock ethic, really creative people, but it was a very small scene. Right. So there was one or two venues in our town where you could play original music, and they were open like one or two nights a week. So it was very small, but very sincere and a lot of fun. And watching all these people play informed my ideas like, wow, you could really push yourself to go out further and further and you make interesting music.
And did you have any idea at the time that grunge, for example, would become so big and so global, or did it just feel like it was something that was contained in the area and kind of special to your scene? Well,
the moment it became grunge, there was already like Tad and Mudhoney were traveling into England, and there was a big buzz. Like, what, bands were leaving our town and going to UK and touring? This was unheard of. So before grunge, it was like everybody had to leave to go to San Francisco or LA or New York. But once the late 80s happened and Soundgarden and Nirvana appear, it's like Seattle became the place, and it just blew up very quickly. Became a lot of fun to live there.
I imagine, yeah. And you sort of drifted into recording, didn't you? Your life just took you in that direction, and
I learned how to record because I wanted to make my own songs, and I didn't want any engineer or know-it-all guy standing around shaking their head about my singing and my guitar playing. But let me do it by myself, and I'm going to come up with some stuff.
And so did anybody actively teach you, or did you just figure it out on the go? And and kind of utilize that sort of punk DIY spirit? And
I think after getting out of school, I didn't really like teachers. I didn't really have a good feeling about teachers. And I thought, I want to go where the teachers don't even know how to go. I want to just find my own way. I had a very good friend in one of my bands who recorded his own music on a 4-track. Yeah. And came up with the most brilliant stuff. And I thought, wow, that is a really great example. So I used a good friend's example, and then I kind of struck out on my own, and it was very slow going. I wasn't a natural at it at all.
But you found your own way there, of course. You know.
Yeah. Like after a couple years of messing around and failing and giving up, one piece of my music got finished. And from that point on, like I was really pleased with it. And from that point on, it's just like whatever I tried, I could always make an interesting recording. It was a big breakthrough.
And there's a lot to be said for, for being intuitive and finding your own way towards your art. My mind was blown when I learned that the Beatles had no idea what chords they were playing.
Wow.
And yet all this amazing music was just pouring out of them. You know, it's a very personal thing, isn't it? And so you set up a studio, or you had access to a studio. Was it Bear Creek, which is just outside of Seattle? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, at first, for a long time, like over a decade, I was just using borrowed equipment in my apartment. I'd borrow a friend's 4-track, another friend's guitar, and I was making music every day, just a new song. And then I'd say near the middle of the grunge scene, I met a great singer named Anne Hadlock, and her family owned Bear Creek Studio, which is just outside of Seattle. And at the time, the Foo Fighters were making their second album there.
Wow.
And it's an amazing place. Soundgarden had recorded there, Alice in Chains, Eric Clapton had gone out there. It's an incredible studio. And suddenly, because I'm in a band with Anne, her parents let us record there. And that was my first time experiencing good microphones and good speakers and good everything.
And how did that change the game for you in terms of how you created music? Or did it?
It really did, actually. When I was recording for all those years my own songs, I was just using the same SM57 microphone that's in every band rehearsal studio in the world. Like, it's the cheapest, most common mic. And funnily enough, today I use those mics on snare drum every session I do. But when you sing through them, you have to do a lot of dancing and a lot of tricks to make it sound like a vocal. Right. And so I was using lots of effects and echoes and phase shifters and lots of radical EQ to make it sound like something. So I go to Bear Creek, and Anne's dad gets out this C12 vintage German microphone and sets it up. And as soon as she sings into it, it sounds so damn good that I actually burst out laughing. Like, I couldn't believe, like, what in the world am I slapping my knee, going like, what am I hearing? It sounds like Ella Fitzgerald on a jazz record already. And he's just running it, straight into the board. So I learned, it was very eye-opening what good equipment could sound like right off the bat.
Yeah, of course. There's one more thing I want to ask you about Seattle, and it's about a shop called the Trading Musician, because I spent a bit of time there this summer. I had to get a Rickenbacker fixed, and we went to the Guitar Center, which, for anybody who's watching is not from the US, the Guitar Center is, I suppose, like the Walmart of musical instrument shops, right? It's very corporate, very clinical. It's a big chain. Mm-hmm. And their repair guy wasn't there. So they directed us to the Trading Musician, which was about 100 yards down the road. And we went in, and it smelled of dust, and it was full of people with interesting facial hair called things like Chet and Buster. And the guy took a quick look at the guitar and fixed it for us for free. And I fell in love with the place forever and ever and ever. Wow. And so, I mean, the Trading Musician, it's been going since forever, hasn't it?
Yes, they have I think they're in their, like, they have a second location now, or in a third location. Mm-hmm. Back in the grunge days, when I was signed on a band and I had an income and a record deal, I'd ride my bike up to the Trading Musician, and I'd go like, oh, look. And I'd buy like a Les Paul and an SG and a Stratocaster and a Fender bass. I've just got so much gear from them, synthesizers, really brilliant shop. And everybody in there just loves music and loves instruments.
Yeah, it's very, very hands-on, isn't it? If you could describe your ideal music shop to anyone, it would probably be that place, wouldn't it? Full of vintage gear, and they've got an entire pedal wall devoted to weird sounds. It's labelled Weird Sounds. Another thing which I really, really loved about the place. But great. And so then you grew up in Seattle, and then you moved to New York. You moved to New York a couple of times, didn't you? But tell us about the first time, which was the 80s, wasn't it, when things were a little bit different?
I was living in a church in Seattle with a bunch of punk rockers, and we had a recording studio, and it's basically
as you do.
It was basically party central, and nobody had jobs, and everyone had terrible drug habits.
Right. Okay.
The place burned down with a mysterious fire, and the place burned down. And I had friends in New York who said, "Come on out here, come on out. We got some gear for you to play. You can continue your recording." So I went to New York with dreams of being a star with my West Coast weird sound. The first time I went to New York, I utterly failed. All my Seattle friends who moved to New York succumbed to the East Village flu, which is another word of saying addiction to cheap and very terrible drugs.
East Village flu.
Right, East Village flu.
It's a bit like a showbiz cold, isn't it?
And I always thought they were so stupid because it happened to everyone in a row, and they all had to go back to Seattle and live with their moms. You know, I was the last to go, and the same thing happened to me, and I had to come back and go to rehab and live at my dad's basement. It was very humiliating. But the second time when I went with Anne Hadlock from Bear Creek Studios, and we went there because the grunge scene was kind of folding up. Kurt Cobain died, Soundgarden broke up, and pretty soon I could feel it going back to being a fishing village. The scene wasn't alive anymore. So we moved to New York to pursue our music, and that's where suddenly people found out I could record things, and I had a studio, and I started recording bands and became a producer for other bands.
So was that Chateau Relaxo?
Yes, very good.
And tell us a bit about that. So that was kind of a series of fortuitous events as well, wasn't it?
A lot of fortuitous events, especially because I was actually off drugs. So even during the grunge era, when I had my record deal and everything, it was the first time in my life where I was kind of clear-headed, and all these good things were happening one after the other. So as soon as we got to New York, we didn't know where we were going to rehearse, and I didn't know where I was going to put my synthesizers and all my equipment that I'd gathered during the grunge era. And my partner, Anne Hadlock, found in the Village Voice an ad for a studio that needed people to be there during the day because the guy worked during the day, and he wanted it all night, and I could have it all day. And it was a prototype of a very futuristic studio at that time, 1998.
Surely that's the best end of the deal as well, being able to have it in the day, actual normal person's hours.
I like to stay up late, but I don't like to stay up all night.
Too late.
Like my partner did. So the reason this was a futuristic model of a studio is because this guy was a real genius. His name's Scott Clark. He started the studio Chateau Relaxo. And instead of having a multi-million-dollar recording console and an old tape deck that needed repairing all the time, all those kind of classic studios were going out of business. It was just too hard to keep up the rent and maintaining the equipment. So he bought like 2 Neve preamps, an Avalon, a bunch of like little amounts of very good gear, and had a computer at the heart of the studio, which was the early days of using computers to record on. He was a computer genius, and he figured out how to like work with the preferences. So we had a rock solid system with Logic Audio, which was a German software at the time. Mm-hmm. They sold it to Apple years later, but at this time it was German from eMagic Company. And then Pro Tools hardware was in the computer. And this whole combination of classic preamps and microphones, this Mac computer, which was called, a Power Mac. It was before the days of the G4s or anything like that.
Wow, okay.
And this software, eMagic Logic and Pro Tools hardware, it just had results. It could make incredible classic sounds in a really like kind of maintainable way. So it was a very futuristic idea for a studio.
And eMagic was eventually bought out by Apple, wasn't it? And
right.
Became
and
Logic.
I don't like it. I haven't liked it since. It used to be the coolest. It was miles ahead of Pro Tools. For example, with Pro Tools in the 90s, you had to open Pro Tools could do audio, but then you had to link it to another really clunky software like Cakewalk or something to do MIDI at the same time. And then eMagic comes along, and in the late 90s, they already had one window was MIDI recording, one window was audio. So it was like miles ahead of really great technology. I recorded both Strokes albums on this form of Logic.
Wowzers, that's insane.
It's true.
So then you met a chap from Germany, from Berlin, called Moses Schneider, right? And
Mr. Schneider, yes.
That led to your next studio in New York.
Yes, yes.
So tell us a bit about that. It was a Transporter Raum, right?
Transporter Raum. So at Chateau Relaxo, many of my friends that I had in New York were German, Swiss, and Austrian. So I was recording a lot of them. And one of my German friends, Nico Weidemann, said, there's a producer in Berlin who's really up and coming. Everybody loves him, and he would love your studio here in New York. And so Moses Schneider came over and started bringing German bands to record in my studio because it looked so cool for his German CDs to say recorded in Manhattan. It's just, he loved that idea, and he loved being in New York. So we eventually got evicted from Chateau Relaxo. And Moses said, well, if you get another studio, I will send you a boatload of gear and some money. I really want to keep this relationship going.
Wow.
So me and my new partner, Jimmy Goodman, we found a basement on 2nd Street and Avenue A in the East Village. And I told Moses, and he was so generous that I named the studio after his studio, which was Transporterraum, which is like the transporter room on Star Trek, where you can go. Right.
That's brilliant. And it turned out to be quite serendipitous, didn't it? Because am I right in saying that Albert Hammond Jr. just turned up on the doorstep one day?
Well, if I could factually analyze that, it would be when, already at Chateau Relaxo, I had this stream of clients coming down, and I was really like, wow, I'm a producer. And at Transporterraum, I had a little business card printed up, and I went all over the East Village whenever a band was playing in a club, and I gave them my card. And so I saw the Strokes play at a small venue called Luna Lounge, 50 people, and I gave them my business card. And the next day, Albert Hammond came over and said, we've seen a lot of really weird studios, like mostly commercial facilities that look really sterile, like they just assume make a television commercial, then record a band. And we don't want to be in a place like that. Yeah. So he saw my studio, which was in a basement with red glitter walls, purple glitter walls, dim lights, doll lamps. It was like, he liked it, and he told me that he ran home to tell Julian, like, this is the studio we got to record in. And that's how I got hooked up with them.
So tell us a little bit about your time recording the Strokes, because I feel like one thing that gets overlooked by them quite a lot is because they looked so fantastic and they had such exotic names. The fact that their music is so tight and so precisely played. Yes. And that's really, I think they get tarred in with the same brush as bands like the Libertines quite a lot, who are quite scratchy and of a completely different ilk. But the Strokes were very, 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 very incredibly precise in the way they played things and incredibly clever in the way they put their songs together. And what strikes me in the book is how meticulous they were with getting every note completely right. You talk about Fab, the drummer, coming back to you to go over individual drum thwacks, to make sure that each individual hit is completely on point and completely on the grid. And tell us a bit more about that.
Well, first of all, they did have great names because I think most of them are first generation Americans, where like I know Fab was born in Brazil, and the other one's dads were born in like France and Madrid. So it's a very international first generation New Yorker band. And then, you would think from listening to the music and from seeing the pictures that this band would be like passed out on the studio floor with hundreds of beers and couldn't wait to get to the bar across the road and just do a few performances and just let me sort it out. But it was completely the opposite. These guys had a plan for everything, and they came in rehearsed to military precision, and they wouldn't let anything they played slip. They wouldn't say the classic thing that most musicians would say, like, hey, it's good enough for rock and roll, or it's close enough for jazz, or it's not supposed to be rocket science. They made it rocket science. They were analyzing everything they did, and if it could be done at a better tempo or more tight or more a different sound or more well-balanced, they were all on it. Every single one of them participated on a very high level, and I was super impressed with that.
And you were very impressed with the way they communicated with each other as a band, weren't you?
Yeah.
Very democratic and they were very forthright and honest with each other without being cutting or unfair or unkind.
Working on music together is guaranteed to ruffle feathers. Someone's going to say something that's going to hurt someone else's feeling, especially if they're tired or we've been overworking. But in this case, I noticed that these kids had an incredible level of communication, because if someone had an issue, they would just talk it out. and they would just get it over and done with immediately. It wouldn't be like a silent thing where one guy's sulking for half of it or leaving the studio. And I thought, wow, a lot of my older musician friends and personal friends could really learn from this form of communication.
And one thing that surprised me about the Strokes a little while in was when I learned that Julian had written all the songs and they weren't written all together as a band. I mean, how did that dynamic work with bringing them to the studio and arranging the parts? I mean, would the parts be there in a raw form and they just bash them into shape, or?
There was no way they were going to come in without everything absolutely as under control as they possibly could. They were rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing before I even met them. They knew what they wanted to do. Yeah. All right. And at that time, they all shared a common dream, which was like, we love Julian's music and we're going to play it with like our life dependent on it. Cause I think things are going to go good, could go good for our band. And we could be like not bartenders and not students. We could be out there playing music around the world. And so they had this dream and this ambition to work towards that.
And was there a moment when you're recording, is this it, where you thought, hang on a second, this could go somewhere really, really far?
That moment actually happened in between. I made an EP with them at first.
Yeah.
It wasn't even supposed
to be an Age EP, right?
Right. It wasn't supposed to be an EP. It was just a demo of 3 songs so they could get some gigs, right? And then Rough Trade in UK picked it up. And they were suddenly touring in UK. They never even toured north of 14th Street in New York. And here they were flying to UK to tour. This was incredible. And then this article came out in NME saying that this thing, the Modern Age EP, is our record of the week. And I would never have imagined that in a million years. This was a time when guitar music was not popular.
Yeah.
Especially in America. Like nobody would listen. No labels would like that music at the time. Okay. So for this little shock of getting signed on Rough Trade and touring and getting this NME feature, at that point I go, hold on here. Like nothing I've ever recorded before has had this reaction. This is actually blowing up. This is something's going on. And by the time we're only a few months later, we're recording Is This It? It was already the feeling that the whole ear was the whole world was holding their ear, waiting to see what was going to come out of our basement studio.
I remember it was like an atom bomb going off. It was just astonishing. And, everybody all of a sudden changed the way they dressed. And, you could tell that something was happening. But I mean, for me, I just want to talk about the recording process from your end just a little bit, because I still remember exactly what I was doing, where I was the first time I ever heard Last Night. I'd read about this song in the NME and I heard it, and it just felt like it was being beamed in from a different time. It felt really new, but really, really timeless at the same time. And I've never heard a band before or since really capture that. For my money at least, the Strokes wouldn't have had the impact they had without that sound, which of course, was of your creation. So I mean, how did that work when you were was it a conscious decision to make the record sound that way and not sort of pander to modern, I wouldn't say modern techniques, but that kind of big, huge, go on, sorry.
Blueprint for both of the records I worked on, Is This It and Room on Fire, happened during the EP. I get this band in, and because I'm a musician and a composer myself, I kind of made it my job that if I'm going to take people's money and record their music, I'm actually going to ask them, what are we doing here? What would you like to hear? Like, where are we going with, not just like, I've got the Gordon Raphael method, play your damn songs and thanks a lot, you'll like it. No, it's like, what do you want to do, guys? And the first thing they said to me was, hey, you know what everybody else is doing in New York right now? I go, yeah, I guess so. That's what we don't want to do.
Right.
I go, oh, so that kind of gave me a picture within a second, like that one registered. What everybody's doing is Pro Tools is brand new, and suddenly instead of 24 tracks like we used to have, or 48 if you're Michael Jackson, linking 2 digital tape machines together.
Wow.
Everybody had 64 channels to work with. And what were they doing? They were using a Bob Clear Mountain kick drum sample with the drummer's drum and an 808 kick drum at the same time. and 4 different tambourines and backing vocals and triple guitar. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So all I said to them was like, in my studio, I have 8 inputs and 8 microphones. So if you want to do what people aren't doing now, just go out there and play your song, and I'll record it with my 8 microphones, and we'll add the vocals afterwards and check it out. And they played their music. They did the instrumentals this way with 1 mic on each amp, 3 mics on the drums, 1 in the middle of the room. And they came in and they said, yeah, that's it, dude. You know, we like that. That is so damn cool. And it was simple as that to kind of get the blueprint of the instruments. And then there was another story about the vocals. And if you wanted me to tell you that, I will.
Yes, please do. Absolutely.
Okay. So we recorded the instruments first, and it was time for Julian to go out. And as I say in my book, he was very unusual because most singers are just like jumping up and down, waiting for their chance to shine. You know, they've got their scarf and their bottle of wine and their favorite pictures, and they're ready to jump out into the studio and sing. And they just can't wait for the people to be done their instruments. Well, when the instruments were done, I said, "Hey, Julian, it's time for the vocals." He goes, "Now? Oh, I have to sing now." He's like really reticent, and he's kind of shy about it. And he kind of had his head down. He looked real serious. I mean, whoa, what kind of lead singer is this? This is not the usual character. And so I said, "What would you like for your vocals?" He said, "I don't know. I want something really special. You know, I don't know how to say it. Just like try something. You know, what do you think?" And so I had been listening to industrial music throughout the 90s. Like my favorite band was Skinny Puppy from Vancouver, Canada.
Okay.
And they ran their vocals through something called the shitalizer.
The shitalizer.
Shitalizer. It was a distortion process of nuclear devastation. Like
wow.
Finding distorted, screaming vocals, okay? So I said, "Hey, check this out, Julian." And I put my best equipment, my Avalon preamp, up to 10, where it was just sounding like a Marshall amp frying out a guitar. And he sang the song, and he came in, and I said, "How do you like that?" And he said, "That is an ugly sound. I hate it." And then he thought for a minute. He said, "You know how your favorite jeans, they're not brand new, but they don't have holes in them." And I go, okay. And that one took me a while. And I thought, maybe, not new, so not brand clean, but not with holes like what I'm doing. So I dialed it back from 10 to 4. And there was a slight overdrive, but it wasn't completely ruined. And he sang again with the new setting on the Avalon. And he came back, and him and the whole band were like jumping up and down. He wasn't jumping up and down, but the band were. Yeah. And JP, their guru, was. They were all like, "Yeah, dude, that is the sound." And that from that point on, that's what we used.
I mean, once again, it's that you know, for me, that fuzzy vocal, you know, it's buried ever so slightly in the mix as well, isn't it? That encompasses the Strokes sound. That's part of what made the whole package so utterly special and really explosive at the time. It seemed to exist on its own plane completely, and I think it still does. You know, for me, those 2 records are unmatchable, absolutely, especially for such a bunch of sickeningly young musicians. You know, so you've got this experience of recording the band, and then you also recorded Regina Spektor.
Yes.
Obviously, a solo artist, really singular talent. Tell us about her.
Well, I play piano myself. That was my first instrument, you know. And so when I see somebody who's mesmerizingly good on the piano, I instantly kind of shut up and I pay attention. And she was this combination of this incredible piano skill, but this kind of moldy peaches, like out of left field vocal thing. Like her lyrics were just blowing my mind. Like, what is she talking about? And she's combining this classical piano technique with these really weird kind of New York underground tales. And I didn't know where they were coming from. She's kind of like an author of novels, and she was really young, so I didn't know how she could have all this experience to draw from. And this was basically my first impression. Yeah. And I actually named my book, "The World is Going to Love This," because when I heard Regina play, I said, "Oh my God, the world is going to love this. I have to record it right now." I wasn't scheduled to record that record. It was just, I was just meeting her.
Yeah.
And when I saw her play, I just needed to record it. And we wound up recording the same day immediately after.
She's hugely charismatic, though, isn't she? I mean, I guess her and Julian Casablancas, for example, they kind of exist on the opposite ends of the spectrum, don't they? Julian's very cool and reserved, and Regina's just big. Really huge personality. She had some kind of drum, didn't she? She was playing the piano with the left hand.
That was the song. The first thing she did is she whips out this drumstick and start hitting a chair, and it sounds like horses galloping, while her left hand is doing these insane runs on the bottom end of the piano, and she's looking up at me singing Poor Little Rich Boy, that song, which reminded me of Patti Smith and the Moldy Peaches and Joni Mitchell all rolled into one. What an unlikely combination.
That's pretty much the perfect combination, I think. I once saw Patti Smith do a cover of My Generation at Glastonbury, and she finished by ripping the guitar strings off her guitar with her bare hands.
That's not easy to do.
Astonishing, especially not for a 65-year-old lady. My gosh, really impressive. So then you moved to London, didn't you? And and you became involved with the Libertines circle. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I had met Pete and his manager, Banny, at the Heaven London Strokes show when, let's see, what songs was it? Hard to Explain and New York City Cops were released as singles before the album came out.
And did Pete not get down on one knee and recite a poem to you?
He did. He said, Banny introduced and said, hello, this is Pete. He has a band called the Libertines. And in fact, we're very interested in having you record their record. And I said, oh, wow, nice to meet you. And I was kind of overwhelmed because I'm in London. I hadn't been there for a very long time. The Strokes just played. There's tons of people all around at this after party, and everyone's there because of the Strokes. I'm kind of feeling like this is the beginning of my new world. And Pete, wearing a dapper suit and a trilby, takes me into the middle of the floor of the party, and he gets on a knee and he rolls his hat down his arm like that classic vaudeville thing. Starts singing me a song, looking at me and singing, and it's so charming, and the song is so nice. I'm thinking, wow, this guy is very special. Yeah, I'll consider working with him.
And did you feel? How did you feel about their music at the time? Because they presented a demo to you, didn't they? And it was very different to the songs they ended up with on that first album.
They presented me a demo, and I was spending the summer running around Europe. I was going to spend the rest of the summer while the Strokes were doing their first summer tour and playing at all the festivals in Europe and in the UK. I was going to go see friends in Mallorca and Berlin, and I brought this Libertines cassette. And one day I put it in my headphone. It wasn't a cassette; it was a CD. I put it in my headphones. And I thought, whoa, what is this music? It sounds like turn of the century British barbershop or vaudeville. And I didn't really understand it. And it sounded fine. It sounded really fine. And I wrote to their manager from an internet cafe, which dates it. You went to internet cafes to write email. And I said, this band sounds really good, but I don't know much about this form of music, like this kind of folk British music. It's not my specialty. I don't think I'd be the right producer for it. So that was that. And then flash forward about 7 months, and I'm landing in London, and I meet Banny again under very interesting circumstances described again in my book. And she says, I know you didn't like that thing, but they just got signed to Rough Trade and they've completely changed their sound. Come to their rehearsal. And I thought, oh God, I got to go to rehearsal. And I walk into Rue's studio on Old Street in Shoreditch area, and they start playing. And right away I'm going like, oh my God, this is insane. This is so good. This is like, I just landed with the 19-year-old Beatles in a punk rock fashion.
Wow.
Harmonies down. The stories and the lyrics are great. Gary's drumming is off the hook. He's so wild and powerful on his drums. I just thought this is going to be the greatest and most loved music in the world. This is really the place to be right now.
See, I've got a theory about the Libertines, and I don't know if you'll agree, but I think that one of the reasons that they ended up being so prominent on that scene was because John and Gary's rhythm section was so tight, and it gave Pete and Carl room to breathe and be really, really loose. But you listen to those early records, and the bass playing and the drumming in particular, it's really, really solid, and it tethers the whole thing together. And I think with lesser musicians at the helm behind those instruments, maybe they wouldn't have had the impact they did, because they would have been too messy.
Yeah. I mean, that music when I heard that music, every song, I loved the songs, and just seeing them work together, and those early shows. I talk about one in particular at Cherry Jam. It might have been the very first performance they ever did with the lineup that's famous right now.
Yeah.
And they just killed it. And everyone was there. All the people from the UK music industry and all the cool rock fans were there. And they just got on the stage, and everybody's jaw fell open, and they realized they were beholding something that was very important.
And by then, you'd obviously created this sound that was effectively spreading around the world, and the Libertines were heavily influenced by that. And how did that feel? Well,
it's interesting, because when I did meet Banny, their manager, for the second time, she played me a series of demos that they made when they first signed to Rough Trade. And again, for the second time, I was absolutely I was offended. Like, what? That sounds like they're trying to rip off the Strokes sound, but they got the sloppy balance wrong. You can't hear the lyric. You can't hear what's going on. They just copied the messy part. Why did they copy the clear part too, right? But when I actually saw them play, it was different. It didn't sound like the Strokes. It did not remind me of the Strokes at all. It reminded me of something completely different. The way those two guys were singing into that one mic, perfect harmonies and the craziest lyrics that only people from London or Britain would understand. Like, it was really Brit-centric, what they were talking about and their language. And so this felt like a completely different band than the Strokes in so many ways.
Yeah. Fantastic. So we normally wrap these chats up, Gordon, with a bit of a cruel question, it has to be said, where we like to ask our guests, what is the greatest record ever made? And everybody's got the right answer. So I'm just curious to know what the right answer is, according to Gordon Raphael.
Well, my answer would change every single day, but today one popped in my mind as soon as you said it, and that is Are We Not Men by Devo.
Are We Not Men by Devo? We never had that one before, actually.
Devo,
yes.
Yes. That is like a brilliant album. It changed my life. I saw that concert live, and I was never the same after that. Never the same.
Well, that's you sell it well. I'm going to go back and listen to that right away this morning, actually. But it's been lovely to talk to you today, Gordon. Thanks so much for joining us. This is The World Is Going to Love This, Up from the Basement with the Strokes. It's out now, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Published by Wordville.
Yes.
Get
available on Rough Trade and Amazon and everywhere.
There we are. Thanks once again, Gordon. It's been fab.
Thank you for having me on, man.